Welcome to our Saturday Simulcast, joined by Brian Neward and Mike Carmen. I'm Alan Karpik, and welcome to this. This will be the January 7th edition of Saturday Simulcast. Boilermakers got off a big win last night in Columbus, and the Purdue winning 71-69 the final, and a huge win for Purdue on the road. And Brian, you were there, saw it in person, and documented it well, but hard to minimize. That was a tough game, and the way that game started, I just didn't think that Purdue was going to get back in it, but they proved me wrong once again.
Yeah, when they were down 12 and 0 for 7 from three-point range, it seemed like they were going to have some issues. But to their credit, I think you saw what Purdue's capable of when they start making threes, and I think the second half wasn't perfect. There was that stretch of turnovers that was, very easily could have cost them this game. Something they're going to have to be on super high alert about kind of moving forward. But when Purdue makes shots, Purdue's pretty good. It's not a coincidence that when Purdue started making threes, all of a sudden Ross-Ade gets going too. And I think you have to give Ross-Ade a lot of credit too for making all the right decisions, dealing with Ohio State's pressure. Ohio State probably had to throw a lot of different stuff at Ross-Ade than they were planning to. After losing Zed Key very early in the game. And anything Ohio State did in terms of dropping guards to double on him, he seemed to always make the right read, made the right pass, and to Purdue's credit, they finally made the shots.
Yeah, makes a heck of a difference when David Jenkins Jr. comes in and hits 3 in a row. Looks like a different operation, certainly after that game got started. Mike, your impressions from last night, just in the fact that Fletcher Lawyer also really, from my perspective, shows an incredible amount of, guts, courage, savvy, whatever it is, even when he's struggled as much as he's had just shooting the basketball, and yet he's hit the 2 biggest shots, arguably, in the last 2 games. What do you make of that in terms of how he's playing, but also these freshmen that continue to be these freshmen, being Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith, continue to absolutely amaze?
Yeah, I mean, they are impressive, and in the exact same play was run last night that was run Monday night. Right. It just Purdue hit the shot this time, and Lawyer hit the shot the other night. Newman doesn't hit the shot Monday night. If Newman hits that shot, then who knows what happens Thursday. So Purdue's staying true to who it wants to be and who it's going to be. They're going to run that play in late game situations as much as possible. But Lawyer and Smith have proven time and time again they're legit. I don't think Fletcher's Lawyer mom gets enough credit for his toughness. I had an opportunity to cover her in high school back at McCutcheon back in the day, and she's a tough lady. And I think a lot of his toughness comes from her. And he's a shooter, and they're not going to back down. And if you go back to what he said after the game Monday, they ran the right play. Zach made the right read. They just didn't hit the shot, and they would do it again if they had the opportunity. And they had the opportunity last night to do it again.
Brian, another formula that just, again, you've been talking about this all year. You both have, in terms of, wasn't Trey Kaufman's night necessarily, wasn't Brandon Newman's night to really contribute in a way that they needed. It was a game, and you know this more than anyone, in terms of matchups. And yet that formula seems to work, and that has to give some level of confidence moving forward that at least 9 deep, again, it just seems to be interchangeable parts and guys that can make a difference at the right time, and that seemed to be the case again in Columbus.
Yeah, before I say something about that, just wanted to add something to what Mike said. I think you got to give Ross-Ade some credit here. I mean, Ross-Ade is the load-bearing wall of this team. And a lot of guys with that sort of burden on them, and also the clear-cut distinction of being their team's best player, in situations like the last 2, they're just taking that ball and shooting it no matter what. He's going to turn around, he's going to truck somebody, he's going to shoot a long hook shot that's probably longer, out of a sense of obligation more than anything. But to his credit, and I was kind of annoyed when Matt Painter said this before I could write it, because I wanted to claim credit for the thought, but I think you have to give him a lot of credit for making the right basketball plays in really big situations, and not necessarily just being the guy who's got to get the shot up just because he's his team's best player. I think he's done everything right here the last 2 games. To your point, I think about depth. Brandon Newman apparently wasn't feeling well in the first half.
Yes.
He and Matt Painter had a little conversation outside the locker room afterwards about it, and Painter kind of clarified to him why he didn't play in the second half. I think that things change a lot when David Jenkins comes in and makes threes, and I think that I think Caleb First did some positive things yesterday, none bigger than contributing to the turnover there at the end after Painter subbed him in to put pressure on in the backcourt. But I think that Purdue is only going to go as far as that first five can take them. But anytime you get a little bit of offense from the bench too, and they just take care of the basketball too. That's just, I think people would naturally be inclined to look at Purdue being ranked number one in the country and think they're kind of a finished product. They're not even close to a finished product. I think you saw what happened yesterday when Purdue makes threes. Now let's see what happens when Purdue makes threes and doesn't turn the ball over the way they've turned the ball over the last two games. I think Purdue's just got a lot of upside remaining for as good as they've been so far this season. And I say that acknowledging the fact that this game was a coin flip at the end, the same way that Rutgers was a coin flip at the end. Purdue could very easily be 2-0 in these last two games. They are 1-1 in these last two games, but they also could very easily be 0-2 in these last two games. That's Big Ten basketball, I guess.
Interestingly, too, Purdue was a 1.5 point underdog yesterday in that win. So no one's going to call it an upset, but it was a game that obviously expected to be very hotly contested, and it was. Mike, you've watched Big Ten. Purdue heads to the Palestra on Sunday against Penn State, who I'm impressed with Micah Shrewsbury just as a coach and the way his team plays. And may bring, and you guys will both have a comment, I'm sure, on this in terms of matchups. Matchups are everything in the Big Ten and in college basketball. Penn State, and I don't know how much you've seen them play, but really is a team can come at you in some different ways that will make for a challenging Sunday evening, I would think, in Philadelphia.
Yes. This could come down to which team can hit its three-pointers. Because that's what Penn State does, and obviously Purdue wants to do that, but Purdue has Zach Edey, something that Penn State doesn't have. And, Penn State struggled with Travion and Zach last year in State College, and I would expect they'll do the same thing this year as far as struggling with that. But Purdue's entry passes into the post have to be better. A lot of turnovers came from that last night in Ohio State. Is it simple as doing some pump fakes, doing some other stuff to get their post players in better position and prevent those turnovers from happening? I know they're facing a lot of length. They don't have, a lot of height on the perimeter, but those entry passes have to be better for Purdue to clean up the turnovers. And when you look at the turnovers, that's where a lot of them are coming from. But, with Penn State, it's going to be a hostile environment. Probably more so than it would be in State College. And, Purdue's going to have to rise up in that situation and really take care of the ball and probably lean on Zach Edey a little bit more in this game because they just have a clear advantage. They're going to have a clear advantage there.
Brian, familiarity breeds contempt. Obviously, nobody knows one another better than Micah Shrewsbury and Matt Painter and what they'll try to do. Of course, Jack Owens is on the sidelines last night for Ohio State as well. But how do you see that matchup on Sunday? Just because of that, like what Mike outlined, Penn State can do it a lot of different ways. They're tough-minded. You got to think it'll be a real dogfight for Purdue.
Yeah, I think I think these games are hard on coaches because they know one another so well, and in Micah Shrewsbury's case, he probably still knows Purdue's personnel to a certain extent. I mean, he knows Zach Edey. Obviously, Zach Edey's a very different player now than the one who was at Purdue when he was. But I think they had kind of a funky game plan last year too in the Big Ten tournament that gave Purdue some problems, and I would anticipate them being similarly creative. For as much credit as Micah Shrewsbury gets for being a really good offensive coach, I think, excuse me, at his core, he's kind of a defensive-minded guy too, obviously. I think he'll have a good game plan in place for Edie. What's funny about the turnovers lately, it's just, I don't know if that's kind of like the transition to Big Ten play where the angles change because those guys guarding the ball and those guys guarding the post are a little bit longer. They're a little bit taller. They're a lot more physical. Edie's getting hit in the back a lot harder than he was when you were playing the Southland Conference back in December, stuff like that. Maybe this is just part of the process for this team learning how to play offense in the Big Ten. I don't know if we'll ever see a game again where Ethan Morton and Fletcher Loyer combined for 8 turnovers. That was the most out-of-body part of Purdue's game yesterday. But the troubling part of this is that it's not the number of turnovers; it's the clustering of the turnovers. It's a lot like it was a lot like last season. Only last year's problems were born out of carelessness, and this team isn't good enough to allow ego or hubris to compel them to not value the basketball. I don't think there's anything more than this just being 2 games against teams that are pretty good defensively and will really challenge you. But Purdue's got to get it out of its system because, I think we've seen here lately that Purdue's not good enough to overcome, bulk turnovers. Now, when you're making shots, you're pretty good offensively. You're really good offensively. But when you look at what happened yesterday, the turnovers almost kind of offset your breakout 3-point shooting game of the season, and that just makes things exponentially harder on you than they have to be. Purdue's just got to clean this up. That's what I kind of alluded to before is that, for a team that's ranked number 1 in the country, they still got a long way to go to reach their ceiling as a team.
Yeah. Maybe a function too of the landscape of college basketball. There just seems to be so much, it seems to be so level. And so, yes, Purdue is number 1. They won't be next week in all likelihood, but that is you're right. There is ceiling to be had, but there is certainly no dominant team, it seems like, in the country. And in the Big Ten, I mean, it's what's interesting. And I'll start with you, Mike. Indiana blows a 23-4 lead to start the game last night. Iowa started making shots, and there was some scuffle at the end of that game too. But Indiana does not beat Iowa in a tough situation. But this league is, you got Northwestern with 1 record, I believe. If you're going to pick your top 3 or 4 teams, can you do that even yet from what you see in the league so far?
I don't think you can do it with any confidence right now. There's the team that you pick goes out and gets beat. Illinois is a mess, and who knows if they'll get straightened out. Indiana's now dealing with 2 key injuries, they had issues even before those injuries. And then when you take those 2 key components off the floor, and you just have Trace Jackson Davis in the middle, where's the rest of the offense going to come from? And you can go right down the line. Wisconsin right now seems to be solid, but Wall didn't play in the second half against Minnesota, and they have Illinois on Saturday, and how that plays out. So every team's going to go through their tough stretch. It's hard to come up with 3 and say these are the ones moving up right now, but all it takes is a bad week to send yourself down again. But I would like to ask the class one question here.
Okay.
If Purdue does win Sunday, should they remain number 1 in the poll? And I understand being number 1 in January doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything at any time. But should they remain number 1 based on the week that they had when you factor in the big picture of this whole thing?
Well, you're not allowed to ask questions, but no, it's a good question. Brian, go ahead.
I'm not sure that Purdue was ever the best team in the country. I think they ascended to number 1 because that's the nature of not losing in November, December, and the very start of January. And once Purdue lost, I think that guaranteed they wouldn't be number 1 next week. I think you've seen around the country that, stuff changes when you get into your conference, and, it's becoming a cliche, but it seems to be a very popular one right now around coaches all across the country. It's hard to win. It's hard to be good in college basketball. And, I think that a lot of teams are dealing with a lot more transition than they probably would have in an ordinary year before everything that's changed in college basketball this year. So I think that you've seen UConn get into its conference and lose 2 games. You saw New Mexico, who was the other unbeaten, get beat right away, right around the same time Purdue did. All 3 unbeatens. The last three standing as unbeatens all lost on like the same day or within 36 hours of one another, something like that. I still think you're early enough in the season where I think just whoever is fresh in most voters' minds probably moves up to number 1. And I think the fact that Purdue's now got a 1 next to its win total probably guarantees that a lot of the people who voted them number 1 probably won't vote them number 1 again. It is a good question. I don't know who the best team in the country is. I don't know if there is a best team in the country. I
go from
I'm
this.
Glad I don't vote.
Well, I used to, but I no longer do that, and it would be a tough vote. But when you still factor in kind of the big picture of what Purdue has done this season, when you look at the body of work, their wins in Oregon,
they got the best resume in college basketball, probably.
Their wins still stand out.
Yeah,
and they're still worthy of maybe obviously being 1 or 2 in this debate. But if they get to this end of the week and they finish 2-1 with a 1-point loss to Rutgers at home, and basically winning 2 road games in the Big Ten, is that enough for them to slide them down? How will voters treat that? And, each 60 of the 60 voters out there, that's how, that's going to be their decision, how they do that, assuming that everyone is paying attention to what has happened this week.
Well, that's the big question.
And there is the rub.
And I think we all know that as diligent as we sports writers are in what we do, we are all focused on one team exponentially more than all others. And sometimes when we have to fill out those things, we're tired late on Sunday night. We just look at records. Maybe we haven't paid attention to the minutia quite as much, which brings us to the other side of that question is, what does the poll do with Rutgers? Because Rutgers just won on the home floor of the number 1 team in the country. They're playing pretty well. If Rutgers all of a sudden is a top 25 team, maybe from an optics perspective, that loss for Purdue becomes more of a, let's just leave them there for lack of anyone else to obviously jump in there. I do think a lot of people, though, when they vote, probably default to blue bloods. When in doubt, go with the safety blanket of a Duke or a Kentucky or a Kansas. Duke and Kentucky aren't in that mix. Kansas, I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I haven't paid as much attention to the national landscape as I probably should. I followed some of the unbeatens, things like that, but it'll be interesting to see what the voters do. I'm glad I don't vote because I wouldn't want that responsibility.
Well, and let me clarify because just, and again, you're right. It is January, but Cincinnati plays Houston hosts Houston at 3:00 on Sunday afternoon. And Kansas has got to go to Texas Tech, and both those teams, and that's of course Houston's number 2, Kansas number 3. And Purdue did get 59 of the 60 first place votes next time. So if everybody is as analytical and thoughtful as Mike Carmen on this, I think you could build a legitimate case if Purdue beats Penn State that Purdue deserves that. Well, Rutgers has got whipped up on Maryland last night. Was it last night? And you got to think Rutgers will, with 4 losses, would move well into the 15 to 20 range, I would think, in the rankings at least.
That's assuming they beat Iowa.
That's right. And all this is funny. So it's fun talk. If you're a Purdue fan, it's fun talk to just even be thinking about it. But Mike, I think will take, and it will be interesting to see. Even if Houston wins at Cincinnati by a point, they still have one loss. So it'll be
Big Ten's going to be really interesting.
I would tend to think.
Because
what's that, Brian? Go ahead.
The Big Ten's going to be really interesting this year because you're going to see probably a season where whoever's just playing the best in the final 2 weeks of the season wins the Big Ten. Because I think you're going to see a lot of parity. I think at some point in time, Illinois at least gets their stuff together enough to knock off one or two people who really matter through the course of the season. I think whoever doesn't lose to Nebraska is going to have a huge advantage, and Nebraska is a very different team now than they have been over the years. I think Northwestern has the capability, as they just showed against Illinois, to play spoiler, so to speak. It's just going to be a really interesting season. Is Michigan State any good? I'm pretty sure Ohio State's good, but we'll kind of find out. They're dealing with a lot of stuff too, as the last minute of that game illustrated last night. They looked like a young team. They looked like a new team in the final minute of that game too. That last set was a disaster. Obviously, Justice Suing throws the ball away under pressure. They just lost their composure, I thought. I think they looked like a team that's relying a lot on freshmen. So we'll see how their season goes. Michigan's starting to play well quietly. Whether that's sustainable or not, we'll see. But I still don't know who's good. I don't know what's going to become of Indiana's season here if Race Thompson's out for a while in conjunction with Xavier Johnson, and they were underachieving anyway with those guys relative to expectation anyway. So I'm just kind of rambling here, so feel free to stop me whenever.
Well, and it's interesting because who would have thought that the Northwestern Indiana game at noon on Sunday is really an intriguing game, because here's Northwestern and game in Bloomington. Well, I understand you got better things to do with your time, but 3-1 Northwestern, and Indiana's on the road. And your point, it's just really a crapshoot to determine who's there.
Northwestern's not a 3-1 type of Big Ten team, though. It just so happens that, I don't know, they beat Michigan State, didn't they? Back in December.
Yeah, on the road.
So they've got Michigan State and they've got Illinois. I guess I should probably give them credit. I don't think they're very good, but I guess you kind of are what your record says you are, right? So were those games more a credit to Northwestern, or they were more an indictment of Michigan State and Illinois? If you watched Illinois in that game, they were up big and they just melted down. And Brad Underwood's post-game press conference was hilarious. It was the most passive-aggressive, I'm going to walk out of this press conference and I'm going to leave my team in Lake Michigan kind of press conference. He's clearly got a very tenuous grip on that team. They are one of college basketball's preeminent case studies in the viability of the NIL mercenary model. I think we'll see how it goes for them. Michigan State, I just don't know how good they are. So I don't know if I want to really crown Northwestern quite yet.
No.
We'll see if they can be consistent.
Yeah, and
I've got the same answers about the Big Ten I had in like June. We're halfway through the season. I still don't know who's really good. Obviously Purdue's the most accomplished team in the league to this point. Does that mean Purdue's the best team in the Big Ten? I think whoever's playing the best at the end of the year, is, and whoever doesn't lose to Nebraska. That's quite a way to boil down the whole Big Ten race, huh? Whoever doesn't lose to Nebraska.
Yeah, this will be more Northwestern talk than we'll ever have in this show, probably. But Northwestern, right, loses at home by 16 to Ohio State, loses at home by 29 to Pittsburgh, and yet wins at Michigan State, like you said, by 7 points. It's going to be interesting to see. It's just maybe everybody but Minnesota and Nebraska are going to be in that situation where on any given night they can get it done. So, all right, we're going to put an end to this, and I won't add the word mercifully after that. I'm just saying I'm glad we're putting it in. It's always good conversation, and we will have our next segment with Tom Dienhart. We'll talk a little bit about Not very much about the Citrus Bowl, but I'm going to guess we're going to talk about some of Ryan Walt's moves in terms of coaching and transfer portal, et cetera. So we'll look forward to that. So stay tuned. Guys, have a good rest of the weekend.
I thought this segment was kind of low energy. It's going to be up to Tom to make up for it. I think I've got interstate malaise right now, I think. So I didn't bring my A game. I've been completely directionless. I've been sitting here staring out this window, just completely phoned this one in. Thank you for carrying the segment, Mike.
Well, I will just, as Painter said before the Rutgers games, the ball movement has to match the pressure defense. And I'm not sure our ball movement today matched the pressure defense.
We're a little
that may have been it. Yeah, and you got to look at the host. I'm to blame for that. So,
and why isn't Tom with us on this thing? What did his Hollywood Square get bumped or what?
Well, he'll join us from time to time, but it's just scheduling today was the challenge. So okay. We'll get Tom back into the mix as well. But it's always is a energy level boost when Mr. Dienhart gets here. I'm going to predict that as well. So, all right, guys, thanks again, and we'll be back in about a click here, and Tom Dienhart will join us.
All right.
Saturday Simulcast with Tom Dienhart, and thank you also to Union Club Hotel for its sponsorship. Tom, a kind of a strange week, just going back to what was, at least from my perspective, and you did a great job covering it, but this whole the way that the Purdue season ended in a kind of, it's about as anticlimactic as you could ever get, a 63-7 loss to LSU, but just the way that the game unfolded. Now that you've had a few days and there's been a lot of activity that's really looking ahead, which we'll get to in a minute with Ryan Walters and staff, et cetera. But just you're now a few days removed, 4 days removed from that game. Any great thoughts, clarity of what happened outside of just a completely outmanned team losing in record fashion?
Not really anything to say. I mean, just forget about it. It was has no real meaning on anything, I guess.
Yeah.
In fact, they're turning the page here. There's a new coaching staff coming in. Obviously, the issues with the roster have been well documented. Who wasn't playing? It was the perfect storm, and it proved to be a heck of a torrential storm, if you will. And 63-7 was worse than the Auburn game. That was 63-14 in the Music City Bowl a couple of years ago. So honestly, there's really not much to say. Like I said, I don't see any point in dwelling on it or analyzing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't really have any value with the new staff coming in. And just one of those days. And some of us thought it could play out like this, and it certainly ended up playing out like that. And just an ugly day. And but again, for fans, hopefully brighter days are ahead, and there's always hope. Like I said, Al, especially with this new staff coming in. And that's going to be very intriguing to see how this staff ends up coming together. And of course, even more so, right? Who's going to come in via the portal. So there's a lot of moving parts going on right now for Purdue football.
You had a chance to talk to Ryan, but the best thing you were able to do maybe down there was spend a little bit of time with Ryan Walters and get some feeling for that. What were your, just your impressions, not only of what he's focusing on, which is obviously roster management, and getting a staff continued to get that, which we had an announcement of a couple new guys here the last couple of days. But talk about just your impressions from that meeting and where you think Ryan Walters is in the process.
Yeah, he's been methodical about it. He talked about how he didn't want to work in haste, didn't want to rush to hire guys. He knows the value of trying to get this right. There's no blue ribbon for being first, right? So, and slowly but surely, we've seen guys added piece by piece. And of course, his first order of business was wanting to get the coordinators in place. And those were the first two hires, with Graham Harrell coming aboard to run the offense and Kevin Kane to run the defense. So, slowly but surely, we talked about that. And, obviously, too, we talked about roster management. We discussed the portal. He's had a chance, obviously, to look at the roster, has a grasp on what he has there and what needs help. I think, Alan, we all can agree there's probably, room to add talent just about any position on the roster.
Yeah,
of course, we've seen one addition, a big addition, and it was with Hudson Card, the quarterback from Texas, coming aboard, right? Have to think, right? He didn't transfer to Purdue to be the number 2 guy. No offense to Michael Alamo, Ryan Brown, or whoever else is still a quarterback on the roster this spring, but I think this is Hudson Card's job to lose. So that was a good first foray into the portal, and it's going to be interesting, like I said, Alan, to see what else they pull out of here the next week or two.
Yeah, do you think, and obviously time is of the essence, at least in terms of the window, right? Walk us through this. Is it the 17th?
Yeah.
What is the
January 18th, January 18th. But Alan, these guys are students, right? Sometimes
right.
People forget this. They actually have to go to class. And for Purdue, that starts January 9th on Monday, right?
Right.
So if you're a student, you certainly have to be enrolled to go to class, right? So again, I'm sure there's always flexibility, right? You can probably enroll a week into classes. Who knows, maybe even 2 weeks into classes. I'm not sure how deep you can go and still enroll and be able to get up to speed for a semester. But again, a week or two. But I wouldn't be shocked, again, given the fact the classes start on Monday. Maybe we hear some news this weekend on commitments, right? Some other guys throw their hat in the ring and enroll at Purdue for the second semester. Because always remember this, Alan, too, that these portal guys don't sign any letters of intent. Just because they verbally commit doesn't mean they're going to show up. And unlike high school kids who sign a letter that binds them to a school, these portal guys don't. They sign nothing that binds them to a school. The only way a school is guaranteed to getting these guys is if they're enrolled. So again, that's always a big step. But to get a guy enrolled into your school, then you got him, so to speak. So again, I wouldn't be shocked with January 9th being the first day of classes for the spring semester if maybe we hear about a couple commitments this weekend. Like I said too, Alan, I think you could probably bleed into a week, 10 days into a second semester, still get a guy enrolled, and he can still obviously get caught up with his classes.
Did you get any sense, to just talking in your time with Ryan Walters, again, my impression of him at the first press conference, a very cerebral guy, kind of for lack of a better term, mellow isn't the right word, but just kind of, he's not going to overreact to stuff. Just from a personal standpoint, he knows he's got a big job, because any coach in a new situation in a world, the transfer portal, where you're basically managing your entire roster every year, which is nuts. But your overall impressions, just in terms of where he is with this whole process.
Yeah, he's a much more cool, calm presence than I, and he's cooler on a lot of different levels, Alan, than me. And
yeah,
maybe that's not saying too much about me, but yeah, he's an engaging person. He's young, 36 years old. You can see where he could connect to the recruits. And you talked about, again, that calm presence, not going to work in haste, and not going to panic. And I think that's always a good trait, is because you're never of value to anybody, no matter what you're doing in life. If you lose your cool, or if you get impatient, and I think, at least from my brief interactions thus far, he seems like a guy who's always going to be placid. And you always got to, again, have that demeanor and the calm, maintain that calm in the face of a storm, because obviously it happens on Saturdays, and you're going to get hit with adversity during the course of the year, whatever you're doing. So he seems to have that type of a disposition. And I'll tell you what, Alan, this entire staff so far, the reported hires, all young guys pretty much. He's hired one guy so far over 50. Brick Haley, the defensive line coach from Minnesota, is 56. Got out of college, got out of high school in 1984. And then Corey Patterson, the running backs coach, I believe, is 42. He got out of college in 2002. Everybody else is under 40. So awfully young, right? And there's always positives and negatives to that, I think. And again, that youthful energy is going to be good. They're not going to probably be afraid to try things, maybe be a little maybe want to take some risks. So again, it's been an interesting staff so far, and by my count, the way I figure it, Alan, he still needs an offensive line coach and a running backs coach. And I've heard that the special teams position may end up being an off the field role. So again, you're allowed 10 assistant coaches. And from what I can tell, there's only two openings left. Actually, if there's 3, if you count special teams, but again, he's got 8 hires. So unless some other coach takes on special teams duties, which hasn't been revealed to me yet, and I was told by somebody I trust that position for Purdue could be an off the field role. And that's not unusual, Alan, to have your special teams coach not even be an on the field coach, so to speak. So again, keep that on your radar. But again, for sure, offensive line, running backs, and maybe we'll hear some news on that in the next day or two too.
Yeah, he's interesting because, mentoring, we've talked about this, and we all assume because he's 36, he's not dry behind the ears yet, but it is going to be important that somebody that maybe whatever his chief of staff to however that position plays out for him, that he's going to have good sounding. But you've mentioned that too. Now, obviously, Brett Bielema and others, Barry Odom on down the line, aren't going to be able to take a lot of time once the season goes to, and maybe not have any motivation to help Ryan Walters out either. Certainly Brett Bielema is not going to, but by the same token, it's just really fascinating. It's going to be really I think that's probably the fun part of all this, is that it's so different than what we've seen over the years, that at Purdue and a lot of places, that you've got a young guy that can come in and kind of really wipe the slate clean of a program that we know over the last 6 years has made progress. And yet in today's transfer portal world, you got to manage it every year anyway. So I'm not sure it matters. It matters that you got the fan base back. That's important. And that you're back on you played in the Citrus Bowl, even though it didn't go well. But he's going to have to kind of start from scratch to some extent almost every year in a lot of ways.
Yeah, most coaches are. You're right. Not ideal, but you always got to be able to work that portal. That's probably going to be what separates all these programs, these coaches, who can work the portal the best, right? And Alan, a lot of that comes back to your collective, your NIL situation.
Yeah.
Let's not kid ourselves,
no doubt.
right? And like it or not, you can kick and scream about it all you want. That's the reality. And Purdue's got the Boilermaker Alliance. We all know Jeff McKean, and they do good work there. So that's awfully important to Purdue's prospects of getting talent out of that portal. Now, talking to Coach Walters too in Florida, spring football, Alan.
Yeah, any news there?
Never as far away as you think. But Jeff Brom would typically start that last week of February. He's a guy I like to get after it early. Well, sounds like Coach Walters really wants to get in 8 solid weeks of weightlifting and conditioning through January and February to make sure everybody's physically ready for spring ball. And most likely, it sounds like they could start spring football the week after spring break, mid-March or so. So we're looking
March
at
18th or so.
Yeah, maybe we're looking at like an April 22nd spring football game. So that's for those interested. I know I like spring football, but for those interested, that's sort of what I think the timetable looks like for spring ball when we first get our first looks at the initial incarnation of Ryan Walters' staff and his personnel. And, Alan, the spring game too, from what I'm already hearing, it's probably not going to be in Ross-Ade Stadium for obvious reasons. I hear there's a good chance that maybe it'll be at a local high school. So keep that on your radar too here.
Yeah, of course, back in the days as I remember, and you remember, we were in a different working life. They played spring games at Carmel. They played one at Merrillville, I believe, one time in Fort Wayne, back when Ross-Ade was being renovated back in Joe Tiller era. One quick question, not off the wall, but does a later spring, I'm just looking at this conceptually, a later spring practice have any effect on because there certainly are guys that could enter the portal after spring ball. Does that change things at all from your perspective in terms of that timing, that it's now later, so therefore guys might not jump into the portal till late? I mean, is anything on the calendar there have any impact on that decision making by Ryan Walters, at least in your estimation?
No, I don't think so. Typically, Purdue was so early. A lot of schools had a timetable that it looks like Coach Walters is going to have for spring ball. A lot of spring games in mid to late April. So this isn't out of the ordinary. And the second portal window opens May 1st to May 15th. So basically, I'm guessing that April 22nd weekend is probably about your last weekend for wholesale spring games across the country.
I would agree.
And everybody will have their calendar clear to spring football. Then you get to May 1st, like I said, May 1st to 15th. The 15-day window opens up. That's when you'll see some more portal activity. Guys coming and going. Guys have gone through spring ball. Maybe they say, hey, I guess I don't have much of a future here. Let me see what's going on. The handwriting's on the wall for me here. So again, that's your next window of big wholesale change. But you can even add guys in after that window if they're grad transfers too. The grad transfers can come and go regardless of their if a window's open or not. So we saw Charlie Jones come last May, June, I think even. So that's June. So and it sounds like every staff, Coach Walters is going to be open for business all the way up to the start of training camp and game number 1 probably. So this roster is going to be in flux for months, I think, as they continue to try to put their stamp on it. Yeah.
Going to be interesting and a new way of doing business in athletics. Go ahead, Tom.
Hey, Ray, real quick too. Now, I mean, I could probably talk for an hour here, but Brady Allen.
Yes, go ahead.
Brady Allen, he's visiting Ole Miss. And I'm told to expect a decision here on his future this weekend. So by the time people are watching this, or maybe on Sunday, we'll know what Brady Allen's future holds, Alan. And don't discount him coming back to Purdue. I think there's still a real good chance he could come back to West Lafayette. I know there's been dialogue with Graham Harrell and Coach Walters, and I know Brady's been told he'll be welcomed back with open arms. And I know Brady loves Purdue, and I know his family loves Purdue. So I still think there's a lot of synergy there between Brady Allen and the university. So, yes, he is visiting Ole Miss, but again, I think there is a decent chance maybe he remains a Boilermaker. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, it will be. And I, as a broad stroke reason, guys, it'd be just good to see him go through spring ball and make his call. I know that's not as easy.
Go through spring ball. And then, Ray, real quick on that again. I tell you what, Alan, I don't think Purdue's going to lose any other guys in the portal. I really don't. I think we've seen things on social media. Tweets guys have sent out. Marcus Bowe sounds like he's staying.
It's a big deal.
Caraway. And we know Devin Mockaby's not going anywhere. I'm not sure about Corday sitting there. He's one other guy you wouldn't want to lose, but I don't anticipate him jumping in the portal. My point is these guys, at least for now, they're going to go through spring football, right? And I know Coach Walters has talked to everybody and done his best to get these guys to buy in, give them a chance. So that's a great sign, right? Marcus Bowe,
I agree.
Devin Mockaby, Corday Sidner, Nick Caraway, probably your top guys you wouldn't want to see jump in the portal. Sounds like, at least from the way I'm reading things, I get the feeling these guys are locked in for now, Alan, which is great. Which is a great sign for Purdue football, I think.
Yeah, it's funny because I interviewed Corday Sidner after one of the practices before the bowl. Really upbeat guy, and he did. And again, I could be dead wrong. Seemed like he was happy to be here and talked about that. But it was going to be interesting to see what happens. You know what? There is no off season in this world. It's just it'll slow down at some point, but there's a lot
going on. There's a lot with the coaching change. Obviously, keeps you hopping, but there'll be stuff going on. Obviously, regardless if there's a coaching change or not. There's always going to be staff changes every year, no matter who your head coach is. And the portal is always going to be hopping too. So, pretty sports fans. They got the basketball, they got the football. There's no shortage of things to keep everybody interested in West Lafayette and beyond.
Yeah. Big win over Ohio State last night. We'll talk with Carmen Brian Newbert about, but a lot of fun from that standpoint. All right, one last question for you. TCU is an interesting situation. Obviously, Gary Patterson did a great job elevating that program. You always want to look at things from a Purdue perspective. I know Purdue's a long way away from being in that situation, but it is proof. And I know TCU's, all the way back to what Sammy Baugh or whatever they had. They've got a storied program to some extent. Yeah. Two things. One, do you see TCU hanging with Georgia on Monday? But then also, is that model of what they switch things? I know Sonny Dykes comes in and he's just a different way of doing things. He's an offensive guy and has had more experience than Ryan Walters. The point is, it does give you that feeling with a 12-team playoff that things are possible in this world. I get that.
Yeah, exactly right. And all you want's a chance, right? And TCU showed that, hey, these quote unquote non-elite schools can stand shoulder to shoulder with these elite programs and not just compete but win. I mean, we always knew that, but it was such a limited pool of teams that got in this playoff, which made it ridiculous. You never even got a crack at a Michigan if you're a TCU before. Yep. And now with this 12-team playoff coming in 2024, we're going to get more of a look at some of these programs that aren't always true year-to-year blue bloods. And we all know, Alan, we watch college football. Any given Saturday, crazy things can happen. I'm not saying a team like TCU could win 3 games and win a national title. It's going to be difficult, but they certainly could maybe win a game or two in a 12-team. Who knows? Maybe they do catch lightning in the bottle, like we see basketball teams do in the big dance in March. So I like it. I think it keeps more schools engaged, gives more schools things to sell, and for Purdue, like you said, now there's that much greater of an opportunity for a school like a Purdue if it's really hitting on all cylinders one year, and things line up from them maybe to sneak in and get a bid. And then again, once you're in, Alan, as you know, anything goes and anything could happen once you get in that playoff.
Yeah, no doubt. It's going to be an interesting game. You're still liking Georgia, though, to take care of business on Monday night?
Aren't you? Yeah, I mean, good. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see TCU win. Don't get me wrong. I know Georgia didn't play that well. I know they weren't happy with how they played against the Buckeyes. And maybe, Kirby Smart's not going to – he's going to be able to use that as motivation, I think, not to overlook TCU. Hey, look, we didn't play that great against Ohio State. We should have probably lost. Here's Texas Christian. They just knocked off Michigan. So my point is, I don't think Georgia's going to be overlooking Texas Christian at all. And I think a chance to win another national title is going to be even more motivation for looks like college football's new juggernaut, right?
Yeah, no doubt. So, all right. Well, hey, always enjoy the conversation and great coverage down in Orlando of a game that the definition F is in futile, but like I said, we've turned the page, and you're right on that. There's a lot to look forward to, a lot of interesting things going on in the world of Purdue football here in the next period of time. It is going to be interesting no matter what. How successful, we'll see, but I think it is going to be an interesting storyline. So, all right, we appreciate our sponsor, Union Club Hotel, and we'll probably I don't know, during basketball we'll definitely have Tom in here, and because there's going to be a lot of news to talk about, so we enjoy that as well. Have a great weekend, to your weekend, everybody, and stay tuned to GoldandBlack.com. I'm part of the On3 network. We appreciate them as well in the Union Club Hotel for all that they do for us. So have a great weekend, everybody.